2 Samuel, first chapter, verse 11. As soon as David hears about the death of Saul and Jonathan and the other Israelites that had died in the war, he mourns and he grieves and he fasts. So do all his soldiers as well. David mourns. I mean, what sense does that make? David was supposed to be king. The present king would like to see him dead. David knows he should be the king. And when he hears the news about the evil king's death, he mourns, he grieves, he cries. I mean, is that the reaction you would have expected from him? I mean, was that the reaction that the Amalekite who told him the news that he had expected from him? To mourn? Was that the reaction that the Amalekite had hoped for? Which brings us to the big question, why did he come to tell David these news in the first place? And that seems to be what David himself is also thinking, because suddenly in verse 13, the focus turns from the death of Saul into the Amalekite, the one who told David the news. Why is he still there? Why is he still around? Why is he hanging around while David and the others are grieving? And so David turns to him and he asks him, well, where are you from? Like, as in, who are you really? And so the guy starts explaining that he's an Amalekite. He's the son of an Amalekite who had taken refuge in Israel. So here you have it. He is an Amalekite, but he's a second generation refugee. He's a second generation refugee in Israel. He might have even been born and raised there, who knows? But at least we can say he is an Amalekite who has lived for a long, long time among the Israelites. And as soon as David hears this, he orders his soldiers to kill him. The Amalekite dies. I mean, why? Why does he have to now suddenly die? I mean, isn't there a law in Israel to protect the refugee that is in Israel? I mean, why is he now being killed? Just because he says that he is an Amalekite? Now, I think that the key to understanding this is in verse 14, where we have David's reaction to hearing that this guy is a second generation refugee in Israel. Because David says, like, how come you weren't afraid to destroy the Lord's anointed one? Like, how come you weren't afraid to destroy the Lord's anointed? Now, here we have it. Here we have it. First of all, how come you weren't afraid? See, this tells us that this guy, he should have been afraid. He should have known. He should have known better. I mean, if he was, like he says, already a second generation refugee in Israel, if he was living there for a long, long time already, then he should have known better. He should have known the Israelite law. He should have known that he can't just go and kill the king. He should have known that he can't just go and kill the Lord's anointed. The Lord's anointed. The Lord's anointed. Mashiach. The Lord's anointed. There is no one in the nation of Israel who is closer to God. The Lord's chosen. The leader chosen by God. The Lord's anointed. Even if he had failed, even if he was tormented by spirits like Saul, even if he rather listened to advice from spirits and false prophets than God, still, he was the Lord's anointed, the Lord's chosen. His life was in God's hands, the Lord's anointed. You don't just go and kill the Lord's anointed. I mean, I get it. It's a little strange that David is speaking like this about a man who wanted to get him killed and who had obviously turned his back on God. But who knows? Maybe David was still hoping for Saul to turn around, to turn to God, to change his mind. At least David himself had had multiple chances to kill Saul in the past. If he had wanted to, he would have killed Saul already a long time ago. But he did not. He chose not to. Not even when he knew that he was the new anointed one, that he should have been king himself. And this is what makes David such a fantastic leader of God's people, at least in this aspect. He knew that he was the real leader, the real anointed one, but he didn't start killing others in order to be in the position that he knew belonged to him. He knew that that's not how it works among the people of God. I mean, that's not how it works among the people of God. The power to pull up or to push down lies in the hand of God, not in the hand of man. God chooses the moment. God chooses the people. That's how it works in the kingdom of God. He could have killed Saul, but he wouldn't. That's not what you do to the anointed of the Lord. That's not what you do to the Mashiach, Messiah. Now, of course, this wasn't the Messiah, Christ. No, indeed not. But it gives us a hint of what it meant to have been anointed, to have been chosen by God. I mean, what a privilege, what a position, but what a responsibility. What an impact that Saul drew on the whole nation for years and years as a bad leader, and still, even his armor bearer was afraid to kill the Lord's anointed one. Instead, he ended up killing himself. Of course, this anointed one wasn't the Messiah, but this was also part of the journey towards him. David, the next anointed of the Lord, is in the birthline of the Messiah, of Christ himself. Now, if that isn't something worth protecting, then what is? I mean, the Lord's anointed, the Messiah. You don't just go and kill the Messiah. You don't just go and kill the Messiah. Well, apparently this guy thought he should have been somehow rewarded for killing King Saul. David says later in chapter 4 himself that this guy was there and thought he was bringing him good news, and obviously thinking he will get some acknowledgement for it. Instead, it was quite the opposite reaction that he got than what he had expected. Regardless if he was lying or telling the truth, in this sense it doesn't matter. For David, the Amalekite had confessed his crime, and there had been no other witnesses to tell a different kind of a story, and so the logical punishment followed for killing the Lord's anointed. In other words, for rejecting what the Lord had ordered. At least David seemed to have taken the Amalekite story as reality. And what other option did he have? He didn't have any other information. A weird story. And to make it into a weird end, it was the Amalekite who brought the new king of Israel his crown. An Amalekite, an enemy, an Amalekite. David had just returned from killing a massive amount of Amalekites. And here he is, an Amalekite, being a part of crowning the new king of Israel, the new anointed one. And David reigned over Israel. But he didn't rule as a king because he had taken matters into his own hands, because he had somehow maneuvered his way into being a king. No, this was the kingdom of God, remember? In God's kingdom, it's God who chooses the moment, and it's God who chooses the people. The power to pull up or push down lies in the hand of God, not in the hand of man. Because that's how it works in the kingdom of God.